Thanks for staying with us here on TVC Breakfast. It's now time to take a look at what the newspapers are reporting this morning. Olamide Adeyemi, I'm handing over to you. Okay, good morning to you.
Right, good morning.
And Nelson.
We also have Nelson with us on the newspaper this morning.
Don't tell me you forgot I'm on the chair this morning, Ibrahim.
Right.
Good morning.
Take it away. Let's hear what the newspapers are reporting this morning.
Interesting stories we have on the newspapers this morning. And as against what we saw yesterday, which was, the removal of the Speaker of the Lagos State House of Assembly, today we have stories bordering on the economy, strictly the cash crunch, inflation, and also on security. So let's see what The Guardian has to say this morning. Right, first on The Guardian newspaper, the Armed Forces Remembrance Day, better equipment, compensation, prosecution of terrorists top agenda. We have the Armed Forces Remembrance Day, and the Armed Forces are asking for, better compensation, better equipment, and also prosecution of some of those terrorists that they have been able to, handle as top of the agenda of the government. When you see the amounts that we are, given to security in the 2025 budget, I think another newspaper also reported that that particular budget is still not enough to tackle. But then the question is, how well have we fared with what we have in the first place?
Olamide, first of all, we have to applaud our men and women in uniform. The job that they do every day to keep our borders secure, with the cost of their lives. The cry for their welfare is still on the table, but these men are out there obeying the command and the orders to ensure that we go to our different beds across this country with our eyes closed and safe. It's something we need to celebrate and applaud them for, even with little or nothing. And again, for the things that I do, I've been to the north a number of times and I've interacted with our men and women in uniform. There's one of the papers which probably would look into a bit later that talks about the limited supply of ammunition for our uniform agencies, again, most especially the police and the army. They're doing as much as they can with the little resources that they have. And so celebrating them is really worth it, because the cost that they pay to keep us safe is something I'm not sure would be able to pay them. But, so it's a great celebration for them today.
Well, and this also extends to other, other uniformed men. We also have the Nigerian police. Every year we hear stories about, their entitlements, they having to get uniforms, getting their benefits and all of that. And so in agreement to what you've said, especially for those in the north fighting this banditry and kidnapping that we are seeing in the northwest part of Nigeria, I believe fighting over their entitlements and all of that, having to ask, having to, be provided for, should not even come up in the first place.
And we also have to give kudos to the present leadership of, the Nigerian army. They have upped the game. I
mean, you see the difference few years back. Some of, this, security situation that we have been seeing. You see that we've actually, progressed from that. And what we are seeing now, what we also discussed yesterday about this ideology and all that. And so the bulk of the work also goes back to Nigerians, also goes back to religious leaders. I think this is also what the Blueprints newspaper is reporting this morning. Let's see what the Blueprint has to say. The Blueprint says war veterans protest over entitlement must not be allowed to fester. He's reiterating what we have also said
let me
about
ask you, have you
forces.
ever seen our old men and women on the queue for their
pension?
Have you ever seen that before?
I have seen that. I've seen some of them even crying. Just, to get their gratuity, get what they actually, worked for.
And frankly, if you then look at the amount for which they're queuing up for, and I'm being taken through that stress for, you'd be like, what in God's name is going on here?
I mean, it's good that you also, mention this issue. The pension scheme is something that needs to, be taken care of. That's a whole lot because, We had, I saw a story, I think we took it also on the breakfast show, where a particular, pensioner was recorded dead and he was alive. And he was also, coming to the media to mention that he is alive and he is entitled to his gratuity. And so what happened at that point? Who recorded him dead? What's the issue with the data?
So I keep questioning the difficulty that has been put into the process of profiling our retirees from all sectors of the economy, right? How difficult is it? I mean, somebody has worked in the system for quite a number of years with his or her details in the system. Why is it then difficult to, be able to give him or her his due pension?
Deserve. You've worked for it for many years.
His details are there. Why do we need to shift the ball each time? It's not a ghost now.
Well, and it's very important to, address this issue across all sectors. Our aged, they need to also be taken care of. For those who have, put in their best in ensuring that the nation is at its best, security-wise, civil service-wise, having to, speak up for their entitlements. I mean, they've done a lot.
If you sit down to speak with some of our, fathers and mothers who were served in the Nigerian army to hear what happened in the 60s, in the 70s, and in the early 80s,
you know that
the price that
they
paid.
They have done a great job.
I mean, it's something to be proud of, but it's also something for them to be rewarded for.
So let's look at what the New Telegraph has to say this morning. I bet it's also on insecurity.
It talks about Simon Ekpa's arrest in Finland, reduced tension in Southeast. This is something that, finally, I would say, is a good ball, because you can't sit where you are to beat the drums of war. That can never be the case. However, we also need to tread on the side of the law here in handling the matter. There has to be all compliance with the laws of the land, so that we do not just, out of personal either sentiment or anger, run across the line to do what isn't right.
I agree with you on that fact about, anger, sentiment. When you listen to, the divergent views we hear about this, that there is a need to, change the way people understand history in that sense. And so when you stay out of the country and determine what is going on, stopping businesses affecting generated revenue in those states, then I think it is a punishable offense. Perhaps the Finland government should also,
I frankly don't understand why, that would have even been something to be accepted, obeyed, and practiced to the point that it becomes a personal threat to the lives of people. That if I go out on Monday, for instance, I'm nailed.
Well, there is also fear. There was the issue of fear, but I want to believe that, that has been addressed in that region. And still on that paper, is saying that Anambra kidnapped victims to expose abductors then as police begins operations. That's a good one. As long as we have, protection for the whistleblowers, those who, go back to, help the security agencies in addressing, kidnapping in that region.
And when we talk about whistleblowers, the first thing that comes to mind is self-protection. If I whistle blow, am I sure I'd go to bed with my two eyes closed in peace?
That is a very, important question to also ask, because as so many security experts have also mentioned, that perhaps those in those communities, those, banditry-ridden communities, are very keen on understanding the terrain for security agencies. They're very important in tackling, because you actually cannot take out some of these, bandits that we are seeing out of those communities.
Exactly.
Most times there are people that they know, but then there is a fear of having to be the one to, expose this. What happens afterwards? Is there a level of protection afterwards to ensure that whoever spoke up is not going to be, attacked afterwards?
Olamide, when I say all times, there are people that they know, frankly. Because again, like I keep saying, I've traversed a little bit some parts of the north, and I've interacted with these persons. It's a dilemma what is going on up north, part of our country, in the sense where they are somewhat neglected. And that is, I want to talk about the federal government here. We're talking about the local government. We're talking about senators and House of Reps members. We're talking about governors who have these people as their constituents. We cannot and we should not always be looking at the federal government alone. When issues like this come up, we're talking about the federal government. No! There's a House of Reps guy who is representing them. There's a senator representing each of this constituency. What are you doing back home to help your people see the light of day? This is really important, because if they get the right help they're supposed to get from their government and their representatives, then bandits and terrorists will not have the inroads to recruit them into their bands.
And I agree with you, addressing some of these issues from, an economic angle, from, providing the needs of the people. Perhaps these people will not be used as, baits for this terrorist, will not be recruited. You remember some of the stories that we treated yesterday as regards, the recruitment. But I think this Nigeria is also talking about
the same thing.
Security this morning. What's it saying?
It says banditry will end on 2 months with adequate funding, minister tells reps.
I wish it was that
easy, right?
Because, well, they're saying that 50 billion allocated to Defense Ministry for 2025. That was what the paper was referring to. For 2025 is too small. And that brings the question about what we've had in the past. How well have we utilized them? But would you really say we've, been able to tackle insecurity to an extent? We have,
when it comes to the men on the ground. Yes, we have. Our armed forces are the pride, one of the pride entities of this country. They are able, they are capable of handling the insurgency from that angle. But that's not the angle from whence I want us to look at this. It's from the economic part. So after you've killed all the bandits and the terrorists, let's assume you're able to do that. You bomb all of them out of the way. What then happens to education in that part of the country? What then happens to the economic viability? Even though some places where if there's no insecurity, then people will have to go back to the farms. It's not just farming alone we're talking about here. For me, education remains the top, on the top of the ladder here. How many children in the north are able to go to school and not under the 3 classrooms? I'm talking about good, furnished classrooms. How many of them are able to do that? And so it's beyond just killing bandits. It's also putting up infrastructure to balance the tide. We've seen the level of, development in, the northern part of Nigeria. There is a level of, development. And I believe the Nation newspaper is also saying something about ending insecurity, which is according to, President Tinubu. Let's see what that paper says. The paper says, my government working hard to end insecurity, says Tinubu. We will invest in technology to fight this terror, says the president. Matawale is also saying that 50 billion naira budget for the defense ministry is quite inadequate, which, brings me back to what you mentioned. Addressing this from the angle of education, from the angle of, religion, providing a source of income for these people. We also talked about those surrendering yesterday. What is the option available to them for rehabilitation, ensuring that they find something doing now that they've decided to, surrender? So this is, very important. But it's great that we've seen the northern governors actually. We've seen the northern governors trying their best to, schools, infrastructure-wise, school uniforms and all of that they provide. But I believe in the northern part, there's also, they also have to change, because some parents still do not accept the fact that their children need to go to school. Absolutely. And so then you also have to go to these parents to convince them and do a lot of that. We will say that for those who, go to school in that region, there is the poverty issue. Yes. And when we look at the recent figure by the National Bureau of Statistics saying that a larger percentage of Nigerians are below the poverty line. So poverty is still a major issue. You have to eat first before you go to school. I want to talk on something you mentioned of the Minister of Defense, Matama, Minister of State for Defense. He's the man in charge of DICON, Defense Industries Corporation of Nigeria. And I've been there. I toured the facility in Kaduna. I saw the potential wealth of the defense industry, what they can do and what they are doing at the moment, right? And so when you mentioned that that amount is too small, frankly speaking, it is. So the government needs to look much more into strengthening DICON, not only, as a partner agency, as it were, but to be able to manufacture, because if we can run quickly to the leadership newspaper.
Before we take that,
Right.
because I believe that if we start talking about security, we could exhaust our time.
No, I just want to hit a point on DICON, because it says on the leadership newspaper, 61 years of DICON, Nigeria still imports military hardware and kits. And so in tying that to what the minister said, that the amount allocated to them is too small, because we cannot have a ministry like DICON or an agency like DICON whose responsibility is hardware manufacturing, and then we are still relying on import of hardware. That does not balance our fight against insecurity.
I want to believe that when we come here tomorrow, we will still have stories about insecurity. But very quickly, let's go to the first news. Let's see what first news has for us this morning.
It's beautiful from what I'm seeing here.
Well, not really. Or your royal rebel Atibanai rejects Wade's Alaafin's appointment, call it a sacrilege.
Well, the first thing that came to my head, this is very funny now.
Okay.
When I saw Atiba.
Oh.
Well, I thought it was our manager, Mr. Atiba, but it's not him. It's not him. I don't really know what is going on here with the rejection of...
I mean, they have rejected the Alaafin even before his appointment.
Exactly.
But this is not the first time that we have been saying, well, Nigerians have been saying that how can we separate governance, I mean governors themselves from
the traditional
institutions, because that particular institution is expected to be sovereign, as against what we have now.
More like the judiciary and the executive, isn't it?
Right, and then there should be a level of, checks and balances when you, especially for a town like your town, picking the Alaafin. When we have a traditional ruler based on appointments, I want to believe that there will still be a level of influence by the governor who appointed you, and then you won't be able to, check the whims and caprices of the governor. Frankly
speaking, I wouldn't lie to you, Olamide. I'm not sure we'll be able to separate governance from a traditional institution. I don't think we'll be able to do that. However, we can checkmate the level of influence and interference at that level, because, again, like you said, it's a sovereign entity of itself, and so must be allowed to function with some level of decorum. The traditional institution and the traditional fathers play a major role. We're talking about insecurity again a bit earlier.
Right.
They are the voices who can speak to the people at the grassroots and influence them to make the right decision and follow the right course. And so if we have to always interfere, even though there's some sentiments around this interference, if we have to interfere at that level that can impede the progress of that institution, then we run into some kind of problem. We don't want to have that, really.
And I believe this is an issue that, the governor should actually address, because we've seen so many calls. But this is not the first time for traditional institutions, especially, that, there is a level of complaints and all that. But let's leave that issue. I want to believe the governor will address that. Another economic issue, which is, we've seen that not just on the platform newspaper, but, other newspapers this morning. For those who have interest in that, you can pick up the newspapers this morning. And on the platform Times, CBN fines 9 banks 150 million naira each over empty ATMs. I mean, some will say, how much do we even have in the banks in the first place for them?
Oh, let me don't talk about we have money.
Okay.
But part of the reason why that has, the CBN has to find them is because you go to, for instance, now I've been at the airport twice last week, to and fro. All the ATMs
All empty.
Doesn't matter which bank it belongs to.
And so to what
All
end?
empty.
To
So
what
if you
end
need
would that
cash
be?
at the airport, you have to speak to the POS operators who have them in chunks.
So are you saying that banks are now partnering with POS agents to generate money?
Well, I'm not saying that outrightly, but I can say that insinuatively, because where the POS operator, where do they have the money from, to be able to run that? And so you go to a POS operator, you can find money in his hands, but then you go to an ATM machine, which is the legal place for financial, you can't find money. So they have to go, answer for why we do not have monies in the ATMs when we come for it. And then this benchmark of you can only withdraw a certain amount of money cannot work, guys. We need to be able to fix that so that people can withdraw adequate for their daily use.
Very important, very key theme that you have, mentioned. Having to, perhaps it's something we should look into. Now
Absolutely.
that you mentioned it,
Absolutely.
I never saw it from that angle, that perhaps these banks are partnering with the POS agents. But then we have charges
Now,
also
remember
while trying to withdraw and all
Exactly. And they
of that.
charge
But
you
this
again.
cash crunch that we're seeing, I really thought, because it started in December, I thought it was because of the festive period. But then we're in January, of course. Why should be ATMs
No, we're
be
saying
empty?
Happy New Year. Festive Happy New Year.
We still have, we're still having this cash crunch, but you always get money when you go to the POS agents.
They never say they don't have
Are you saying they're
money.
buying this from the banks?
So it behoves on the CBN to place that sanction on the bank so that if you have to pay such a whooping sum of money for not having monies in your ATMs, then you will make sure that next time you would have money in the ATMs as opposed to POS operators having to collect money or have money to give customers each time we come to need those monies. Olamide?
Right, so I think these are the papers that we have this morning. Because of our time, we would have taken more. But let's quickly go back to Ibrahim. Ibrahim in the studio. Ibrahim, I'm sure you were listening to us. What were the major stories for you this morning?
Yeah, absolutely. So many stories you guys, got there, especially talking about the veterans, the fallen heroes, whose remembrance we'll be doing today. It's part of the things we'll be discussing. And I think I actually especially liked what Nelson and even you, Olamide, said regarding the fallen heroes, the veterans who are not getting their entitlement after serving the Nigerian nation, protecting the sovereignty and peaceful nation for the Nigerian people to enjoy this country. At the same time, if you go to Oyo State, the Atiba family is saying that, listen, that was a sacrilegious action that has been taken in selecting or appointing the next Alaafin of Oyo. I saw what you did there, Nelson. Maybe we'll kind of be in solidarity one way or the other. We are not taking sides, but probably with the Atiba family.
I like that.
Thank you for mentioning that. But of course, we will, be looking at other stories tomorrow. We are doing this tomorrow, same time. But back to you in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelson and Olamide.